With For a Few Dollars More, the second Dollars film, Leone at last had a sensible budget to play with. $600,000, which in 1965 is a lot of money. He had a sympathetic producer, Alberto Grimaldi, the Neapolitan lawyer, and he also had quite a good deal, so he made some money out of this film. He hadn't made any money out of Fistful of Dollars. There's also a sense that, yeah, I've had a hit. I want to prove that it wasn't just a fluke and that I've got more in me. So he begins to relax in his style and in the way that he tells the story. The first 20 minutes of For a Few Dollars More is interesting because he actually has the confidence not to start the story until he's done an exercise in pure style for 20 minutes, introducing the Lee Van Cleef character and having a couple of incidents involving him. Introducing the Eastwood character and then cross-cutting the two. And about 20 minutes in, the story begins. So he's relaxing into this and he's taking his time in telling stories.
Where is he?
Developing this style of telling stories in a rather elliptical way, so you don't quite know what's going on. You discover in retrospect what you've just seen.
I've no idea where he'd be today.
And you have enigmatic shots that you don't quite understand, or moments like a flashback that isn't explained. So he's having the confidence to hold back from his audience, to keep them on the edge of their seat so that they'll be intrigued with what happens next. And the Leone trademarks emerge. The circular duel at the end, the careful framing, big faces on the right here, and in the background something else going on. The production design, which really comes into its own with the town of El Paso, designed by Carlos Simi for A Few Dollars More, which is the great Leone town, larger than life with the Spanish topography in the background. And the score by Ennio Morricone begins to relax as well. With For a Few Dollars More, they find their voice, and the Leone style emerges. When it was time to cast For a Few Dollars More, Eastwood was a given, but who do you have as the bad guy? Leone chose Gian-Maria Volonté again from Fistful of Dollars because he wanted a huge, larger-than-life baddie who in the script is called Tombstone.
Hasta luego, amigo.
Who shoots women, children, troops. He smokes dope, he does everything, shoots his own men. They piled on the theatrical attributes in the second film. Occasionally there's a whirring noise on the soundtrack in case you hadn't noticed he was a psychopath. And this was partly to explain why he was this huge, huge personality. They had to give him all these bad guy attributes, otherwise it would seem just strange. Well, it's pretty strange anyway. He had to be a big, big, big character to contrast with the Americans. So Volonté was the man again. It got a bit tense on the set in Almeria because Volonté's theatricalism was getting on Leone's nerves by this stage, and he wanted to reduce the size of his performance. But he still was very big, and Leone remembered trying to tire him out by having lots and lots of takes to try and reduce his performance, because even having said all that, he seemed too theatrical.
What are you doing here? Go on, get them back!
Later, there were rows on For a Few Dollars More about this, that Volonté got a bit of a short fuse because he kind of felt he wasn't being used, and he referred to making westerns as a tiring genre in which I do not have much interest. Then he moved on to a lot of political film. He was very left-wing, Volonté, and he made a lot of political films in Italy in the mid to late 1960s and became a sort of icon of political cinema. When they were preparing the attributes of Indio, someone suggested, why don't you have him smoking marijuana? Now, I don't think they knew very much about marijuana. The assistant director, Tonino Valerii, remembers them saying, yeah, in third world countries like Brazil and Mexico, they smoke marijuana to sort of take their mind off the cost of living. So that fits with this kind of Mexican thing, bit of stereotyping there. But maybe they'd seen reefer madness once too often, because the effect that this marijuana has on Indio is quite astonishing. He takes a puff, electric whir on the soundtrack, the screen goes red, everything's distorted and all the rest of it. And they seem to think that, you know, lighting up a spliff completely blows your head off in this way, but I don't think anyone had ever actually tried it. But it added to the kind of baroque nature of his villainy. I mean, this guy not only does horrible things, but his mind's pretty horrible as well, and it's being distorted by rolling up a spliff. Well, actually, he doesn't roll it. He goes like this, and one of his henchmen gives him a ready-rolled spliff. I think there was a little bit of innocence about marijuana, but in 1965, it's the first major character in a big-budget mainstream movie to smoke dope. They didn't know they were breaking a taboo. They just did it. For his second film, For a Few Dollars More, Leone wanted a mature character, an American actor, to set against the Eastwood character, this young, impetuous bounty hunter. And originally he wanted Henry Fonda again, but it wasn't to be. He wanted Bronson again, Charles Bronson, it wasn't to be. And then he thought Lee Marvin would be great. And they were almost at the point of signing Lee Marvin when Lee Marvin went off to make Cat Ballou. So Leone had problems. The set was being built in Almeria, the die was cast. He remembered Lee Van Cleef from all those Hollywood movies that Lee Van Cleef had made in the 1950s, where he was the second bad guy from the left who always died about halfway through the film. His career was small part bad guys. Occasionally he got a line, usually he didn't. But he had a very distinctive look, his face, this aquiline face that Leone reckoned resembled Van Gogh, and this silhouette in the way that he walked. Somehow he tracked Van Cleef down in Los Angeles and arrived with the production manager with a suitcase full of dollar bills, caught sight of Van Cleef across the car park, and Van Cleef was wearing a long raincoat. And Leone turned to the production manager and said, don't even, get that man to talk. He looks so great, and I might change my mind if he starts talking. Just sign him, give him some of the dollars in the suitcase, and let's get over to Italy with all speed. This guy's perfect. So Van Cleef was signed there and then, given a few dollars more out of the suitcase, and found himself on a plane to Rome, where he was given the script, which was a rather wooden translation. And I think he was probably quite baffled on this flight to Rome. And Leone said, what do you think of the script? And Lee Van Cleef said something very strange. He said, I think it's Shakespearean. He was a bit muddled, I think, jet lag. It's Shakespearean, it ain't. He arrived, and the following day, he was at Cinecittà shooting sequences of looking out of the window through the binoculars. And I mean, it's an extraordinary story. And he never looked back. He became a huge superstar in Europe after that. Leone had a very long cinematic memory. For him, Lee Van Cleef was the sum total of all those parts in 50s Hollywood westerns. You're not casting him for what he does, you're casting him for what he stands for. And in audience's mind, he stands for all those bad guys.
Even the Bank of San Francisco isn't that well protected.
To try robbing us would be so futile that only a complete fool would attempt it.
Or a complete madman.
And it's an amazing performance, actually. I mean, very assured for someone who really hadn't had that size of part before. Of course, he had Eastwood to talk to. Eastwood didn't have anyone to talk to when he was in Fistful of Dollars, but there's two Americans, and they can swap notes and discuss how to cope with this man who keeps saying, watch me, as he directs and so on. When Colonel Mortimer opens his saddlecloth outside the hotel, there's a down on the soundtrack, which is always a cue from Morricone. It's a gag. It's a sort of piece of punctuation. He has this incredible armory of weapons, this very careful, calculating bounty hunter in his specialist's outfit of his cape and his black suit and tie pin. He's a very fastidious sort of guy. He's got shotguns, he's got a buntline special, he's got barrels of different lengths and everything. It's wonderful. He's like a walking ammunition dump. And he selects his weapon carefully and waits till the victim is out of range of pistol shot, right between the eyes. It is partly James Bond and all those gadgets that Q supplied James Bond with. It's like the Aston Martin with the ejector seat. It's that kind of idea. But it's also that the heroes of these movies are brilliant at technique and technology. That part of their heroism comes from the fact they are better at shooting than anybody else, and they know about weapons. As someone once said, in traditional Hollywood movies, the hero was the best shot. In Italian westerns, the best shot is the hero. The guy who is best at it wins. And Van Cleef is best at it because he's really thought out weapons for all occasions. One of the features of Leone's stories, as distinct from the movies, is the emphasis on friendship between two males. It becomes the point of the movie very often in Fistful of Dynamite, and to some extent in For a Few Dollars More, the Colonel Mortimer and the Eastwood character. Sergio Leone was an only child who came late in the marriage of his parents. He was obviously very spoiled by his mum. He felt the absence of a brother very much, and he was quite obsessed with this idea of friendship, of gangs, of groups of people going around supporting each other. And he often said this, that he was kind of inventing the brother that never existed in his own life. And so you get these really quite touching relationships between the old man, Colonel Mortimer, and the young reckless man in For a Few Dollars More, between the peasant Juan and the intellectual revolutionary Sean in Dark Cusacker. They're surprisingly sentimental in a way. Everything else is very hard, very tough, very hard-edged, but there's a soft edge to these relationships.
Is that a proposition? Mm-hmm. An equal partnership.
It isn't a gay thing. It isn't. It really isn't. It's pre-sexual. It's pre-Freudian. It's yearning for the kind of Western where Rin Tin Tin did all the thinking. It's looking back to a golden age. It is not a sophisticated gay relationship, but the iconography has subsequently been taken up by the gay community.
I think I might just take you up on your proposition.
Let's drink to this partnership.
To the partnership. With no tricks, of course.
No tricks.
Everyone remembers that Leone had one phrase that he'd learnt in English: watch me, watch me. Leone loved storytelling. I mean, how he evolved his screenplays was to get a basic idea, usually the opening sequence, and then try it out on all his friends. So he'd do it as an after-dinner party piece, and he'd elaborate on it as he told it, and he'd evolve it over several months, which is how his screenplays came to fruition. So mime and telling stories was his way of communicating. Also on the set, watch me, Clint. So he'd act out what he wanted Clint Eastwood to do. He was short of stature, Leone, and he wore a funny cowboy hat and thick glasses and, looked a bit like Yosemite Sam, and it must have been a rather bizarre thing, this little tubby Roman guy being a huge macho hero, but he'd acted out, watch me, Clint, watch me, Lee, and all this sort of thing. And in the process, he would Romanize the character, that if on the page it looked just like, your common or garden Hollywood hero, in the acting out, it became a Roman villain, someone who's a bit sly, a bit on the take, and has a bit of a twinkle in his eye. He's a trickster, a rogue, a lovable rogue, a sort of harlequin figure from culture. And I think in miming, it came through in showing the actors what he wanted. Watch me, Clint. And Clint was watching.
Why don't you just sit down and send out the alarm to El Paso and the rest of the towns around here and warn them, right?
But, mister, I didn't hear any shots at the bank, and I sure would have.
You might hear one. The alarm.
Leone's sense of humor is there in For a Fistful of Dollars, but it really comes into its own in the second film, For a Few Dollars More, where this kind of vulgar comedy that Leone loved, a music hall comedy, usually involving big buxom women or hoteliers or clerks or sheriffs. It's sort of mocking the little man.
You people need a new sheriff.
Which is very strong in Italian comedy tradition, right back to the Commedia dell'arte in Renaissance times, where the petty official is laughed at by everybody because nobody likes the petty official. This is the tax man. This is the guy you meet in your everyday life, and so lots of scorn poured on them. Well, that's transposed into the Western. But at a deeper level, what's mocked in all his films is the religious iconography of the Southwest. I associated Westerns with the Middle West, with Wyoming or with the Rockies or with Cheyenne territory. What I hadn't associated the West with was bells, and crucifixes, and coffins, and bell towers, and baroque angels, and cemeteries, and all the paraphernalia of the Southwest. And that iconography is very, very strong in Leone's films from the word go. But it isn't just that. He then goes one step further and mocks all those symbols. It's fairly gentle to start with, although it gets more extreme as his movies progress, where you take those symbols and you're saying, Don't think for one moment that morality lies there with the church. This is an immoral or even amoral universe of dog-eat-dog, where all the characters are completely at home with violence, even the hero. So don't think for a minute that the church provides a moral alternative. You get hallowed moments from religious iconography like the Last Supper or like an interior of a church used for a completely different purpose. The Last Supper in Fistful of Dollars is the bad guys getting together to get drunk. In the case of the interior of the church in For a Few Dollars More, it's so there can be a sermon about robbing the bank in El Paso, and you have all these cutaways of the 12 buddies sitting there as they see the light. Only they're not seeing the light because of the sermon. They're saying, oh yeah, that's how you break the bank in El Paso.
The money isn't in the safe, it's right in this. Almost $1 million in it.
It's not just getting the Catholic Church, it's getting morality. It's saying old-fashioned morality is out. Come on, it can't have been like that. We know life isn't like that. The Wild West would have been a much tougher place, and it's part of that project.
Big joke, wasn't it, amigo?
Who said I was joking?
When Leone was a child, these Hollywood films made a huge impact on him. He loved these movies. They were like fairy tales to him. And he was really disappointed that Hollywood in the 50s and early 60s wasn't making fairy tales like that anymore. How do you get back to that magic? How do you re-enchant the movies? You pump it up, you make it big, you have effects, so the audience comes out reeling from the sensory experience of seeing this film. And maybe they don't understand it the first time, so they go back a second time. He said, I want to make fairy tales for grown-ups. I want to make movies that have the kind of impact that movies made on me when I was a kid, only I want to do it for a sophisticated 60s audience. One thing Leone felt about the classic Hollywood Western was that it sanitized violence and brutality too much. Good guy pulls out gun, cut, guy falls over. You don't see the bullet hole, he falls over in one. And Leone knew a bit about firearms, and he knew that that very, very seldom happened in the Wild West. He wanted to emphasize how messy and nasty the brutality was. So there's partly a realism, but also it's part of the operatic quality that everything's pumped up, including the violence. The visuals are pumped up, the performances are pumped up, the music is pumped up. It's a kind of rhetoric where, you know, you take moments in the Hollywood film and then you multiply them by 10. It's one of Leone's favorite phrases, I must create an effect. And part of the pumping up is the violence. So this pumping up of everything is part of that project. It's bring the magic back to the cinema because the magic has been lost. And it's sweet, it's sort of regressive. I want life to be like I was like when I was a kid. There's a kind of grown-up kid element to it all.
For a few dollars more.
It was a huge hit at the time in Italy. In terms of influence on the Italian Western, For a Few Dollars More is the one, because that really opened the floodgates. By 1967, 68, between 50 and 60 Westerns are being made in Italy while they're shooting Once Upon a Time in the West. Hollywood was making 13 a year in a good year at that stage. 50, 60, 65 Westerns, it was an avalanche. For a Few Dollars More was so successful commercially, and everyone loved it so much.
Bravo.
From 1965 to 1971, it was the most successful Italian movie that had ever been made.
Go, go, go,